are up to our fourth session of our first Do No Harm Summit, and we are talking to
you need help with that one?
Lisa today from the glorious Hoof. We have had some really great presentations already today from Lisa Marie. My takeaway from that is that I need to have tea with her, go to tea talk with her. And we also had a brilliant presentation from Anna, and my big takeaway from that is just because someone made it doesn't mean it's any good. If you are needing some advice on bits and mouthing, I would highly recommend going and talking to Anna and checking out her presentation that she did as well. We've got more sessions throughout the day. So we've got Lisa today from the glorious Hoof talking hoof care, which is going to be super exciting. She's a meld of barefoot trimming and farrier work, which is right up my alley, that's for sure. And we've got Jane this afternoon talking aromatherapy for horse and humans. Then we're going to be talking dressage this evening. And of course, more on the way tomorrow. If you have any questions, we are keeping track of them in the chat, and we will ask Lisa as we go. If you are watching the replay, you can write hashtag replay, and we will pass the messages along or tag the people in it that can answer those questions, because clearly I can't. I'm not the professional in these industries. You'll get your video in the email, or you can watch the replay in the group. And I think that's all of our notes to get started. So Lisa, let's over to you.
Thanks so much, Katie. Welcome everyone to my talk on the horse owner's hoof care checklist. So I've put together some stuff that are, I guess, easy wins and things that you can do to tighten up your horse's hoof care. So I guess we can, you know what, we'll just have we'll go to the next slide. What I'm going to chat about today with you guys is it's all going to come back to species appropriate care. I'm a big proponent of having a think about the way horses evolved, and their genetics will tell their body to grow a certain way and to utilize their their environment in a certain way. So that's my number one thing. Then we're going to move on to trimming and shoeing cycles, through to hoof infections, how much movement your horse is getting, the diet, and then we'll finish up on hoof protection, which will be the fun bit, I think. So hang in to the end for the fun bit, because I've got some cool props. Next slide, a little bit about me. So I'm a self-confessed hoof geek. I always have been. So when I was about 12 years of age, my mother bought me a pony, and he was really naughty for the farrier. To be honest, looking back, he probably wasn't that naughty. It was more, our handling capabilities. But yeah, we couldn't get our farrier to come back. So my mother, being a non-horsey person, thought, oh, my 12-year-old daughter can do that. Bought me a hoof rasp, and away we went. And thank God that pony had excellent feet, because I don't know what I would have done. He just had great feet. So it could have been a disaster, but it wasn't. But it ignited this huge passion in me. I don't know what I'd be doing now if it wasn't for my mum thinking that I could just do what the farrier did. I did my diploma of equine podiatry back in 2013, and I'm currently studying a Bachelor of Equine Science at Charles Sturt University, which I just love it. I love studying continuing education. Like in it, I mean, 2020 was a big year for me, but we're missing out on quite a few different things this year, continuing education. But I normally go to 3 or 4 or 5 hoof related, or at least body work or biomechanics related continuing education per year. So am I a barefoot trimmer? Am I a farrier? What do I call myself? So I generally say I'm a hoof care practitioner. I specialize in barefoot, booted and polyurethane shoe hoof care. All right, let's get started on my main point. So species appropriate hoof care. Horses evolved around, 55 million years ago. That's a lot of evolution. If you were to put that evolution on a 12-hour clock, domestication is probably like the last couple of seconds on a 12-hour clock in the story of equine evolution. So they evolved. The modern horse ended up being involved in an area where they had a lot of grass, and each of those blades of grass was not calorie dense. So they have to eat a lot to be able to get enough energy to fuel what they needed to do, which not moving. Moving not quickly, but moving a lot during the day. We'll get into that later anyway. They continually graze. They're a hindgut fermenter, which means they don't do a lot of digestion in the gastric stomach like we do. Most of it's done microbially in the hindgut. And they moved a lot, but maybe not as much as you think. We're going to get into that. Domestic horses, even just by putting a fence around a horse, we're changing their life significantly to what their DNA tells them that they should be, the life that they should be living. So we restrict their movement, we feed them meals, and we ask them to perform. Just the act of sitting on a horse can significantly change, like even just sitting on a horse a couple of times can create bodily changes. I'm not a body person, but there's been on dissection, there's people have found, in particular Sharon May Davis has found in ridden horses that there's arthritis and things even if they've only had a light workload. So there's a lot we ask of our horses today. The modern horse has a really different lifestyle to their ancestors, and that's relevant to you as a horse owner. Very relevant. As a horse owner, if you are empowered with knowledge, you can be the best advocate you can be for your horse's health. Your horse can thrive if you are empowered with the right knowledge, right? You can change your horse's life. That's what I'm really hoping people get out of today's presentation with me is I really hope I kickstart something in your mind that makes you just think a little bit deeper about the way, your husbandry practices, not to say that they're necessarily wrong, but how can you achieve more? How can you make it better for your horse? I really think that, how in zoos they have enrichment and whatnot with zoo animals, we need to start thinking about our horses a little bit that way as well. All right, trimming cycles. So you see a lot of horses, what the traditional view is a 6 or 8 week cycle for trimming or shoeing, right? And if we take into account that the horse's hoof grows at, around 4.1 to 7.1 millimeters a month. I'm sorry, I haven't done my conversion into imperial there for our international listeners, well, our American listeners rather, and watchers. But the things that we need to think about when our horse is, so when I go and trim a horse, I trim it to a certain balance, and I'm thinking about not just the balance of the horse today, but the balance of that hoof throughout the entire trim cycle, right? And I'm thinking about the blood flow in the foot. When we make balance changes in the foot, we significantly can affect the blood perfusion throughout the foot, the front of the foot, the back of the foot, either side, and changing that can really, and I'll show you in some examples in a minute, how that blood flow is so incredibly important. And also we need to think about leverage. So I'll get my bones out. If anybody has never seen a pedal bone before, this is an equine pedal bone, probably from a horse around about maybe 15.3, 16 hands. That's the bottom surface. If you were looking at, this is the side, this is the view that we're showing in the picture at the moment from the side, right? And I don't know if you're going to be able to see very well. It does have lots of porous holes in it, but there's more holes on the sides of this bone. See the tiny little holes there? Then, I mean, these are all the big holes are vascular changes, and the tiny little holes are issues that have been caused by leverage and inappropriate leverage on the bone. So there's more at the sides, right? Leverage can severely cause basically osteoporosis in the bone. So we really need to think when I'm trimming a horse, it's not just the balance side to side, it's not just the balance forward and back. it's thinking about the blood flow, and it's thinking about the leverage on that bone. And I want a nice, tight little hoof capsule, as small as possible, while still providing enough protection around that hoof. So when I trim a horse, how long is that balance going to hold? How long is that leverage reduction going to hold? If they're growing at 4.1 to 7.1 millimeters per month, it's not going to hold for particularly long. So I think a 6 to 8 week trimming cycle is way too long. And I prefer to work on a 3 or 4 week schedule. Some horses I might have on a 5 or 6 week schedule, depending on the health of the foot, but I really like, you're going to have optimum balance most of the time. As soon as anything's out of balance, you're going to be causing not just problems in the foot, but problems higher up in the body, in the limb. And that's something that a horse owner can have quite a bit of control over, as long as you can get your farrier or your trimmer to come on a shorter schedule. Most of us are happier to do a shorter schedule. Our results are so much better. We get and it's less work, I guess. Like, don't wait for your horse to look like it needs a trim. Now, Pete, we'll have a look at this this hoof here. I don't know if you're going to be able to see my cursor. Can you see my cursor, Katie?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
so
most people on Facebook
might not be able to see it on Facebook. Okay. Well, if you can't see my cursor, we're just looking at this hoof capsule here, and you might think, oh yeah, he's got a little bit of chipping around the edge of the wall, but there's no big cracks. He doesn't look like he's due for a trim yet. Some owners might think, oh no, he's good, he can go another week or two. This horse is actually severely out of balance. His toe is way too long. His heel is underrunning. This chipping, what he's actually trying to do with the small little chips is he's trying to self-trim. So this horse is, he should have been seen a week or two ago. Short trim cycles are going to be, it's something that's an easy win for you. This is an example of a horse that went from, my screen is covering, my Zoom is covering my notes. This horse moved from a 6 week cycle on the left-hand side here to a 3 or 4 week cycle on the right. And you can see there's, I don't know, 12-ish weeks in between these two photos. But look at the difference. So this horse had been in my books for around he had been on my books for a while at 6 weeks. And we're having issues with seedy toe. You can see I've got a cut out of the bottom left of that hoof on the left there. That's my seedy toe resection. We'll go into that a little bit later when we talk about hoof infections. But the sole is looking a bit thin. The heels are a little bit run forward. The frog looks okay, but that's a pretty structurally weak foot. And then when I moved him to a 4 week cycle, his foot, like the hoof wall, grew out beautifully. It stopped chipping horribly. His heels stayed back where they needed to be. He's still a little bit long in the toe, but this horse continued to get better and better. And the frog, he just recently shed it. Like horses shed their frogs a couple of times a year, normally during the time when they're changing their coats. And they can lose some people might have seen it. You can lose the entire frog. And so that's the only reason why the frog doesn't look as good here. This is a really good example. This horse was already managed on a 4 week cycle. You can see he's got in the top two photos that were taken on the same day before and after the trim, he's got a really run forward foot. That toe is way too long. This guy, he was a retired horse in a paddock, and they were already doing a 4 week cycle, or 4 to 5 weeks. And you can see on the right here, after the trim, I just wasn't able to get the toe back where I needed to. I wasn't able to trim as much into that foot as I needed to because the foot was structurally weak. So around 5-ish months later, or six-ish months, you see in the bottom here, look at the left photo on the bottom left, compare it to the left photo on the top. Look how much shorter that whole hoof looks, even before the trim. Look how much underneath, how much more underneath the foot. The balance is more underneath where the horse needed it, even at the end of the 3 week cycle. And then after my trim on the right-hand side, look, compare the after trim photos at the top of the bottom. This horse has not got a good foot. He's got a really poor foot. He's had long-term, he was a rescue and long-term neglect of the feet before we even started on him. And I'd been trimming him for a good 12 months before all these photos were taken. But there's so much more I could get done on a shorter trim schedule. Everything with horses, is better off little and often, feeding them little amounts often, trimming them little amounts often, riding them a little bit amount often, right? It's so much better. Everything with horses little and often is just, it just works out so much better for them.
Can I just ask you to go into a little bit of detail about the angles and lines that you're looking at?
Of course, yeah, definitely. I'm not going to be able to look at the screen when I'm doing this. Oh no, maybe I can. So if we have a look at the top left photo, look at the very tip of the front, on the very left of the photo where the tip of the toe is. I should have kept more of this horse's leg in his photos, but that tip of that is way in front of the limb, right? And his breakover, the breakover is the point where the heel just starts to lift off the ground and the foot starts to pivot around the toe. You want that nice and short under the limb, the breakover point, because the longer the breakover, if you think like yourself wearing your normal shoes versus wearing big long clown shoes, right? In your normal shoes, you can break over quick, you can have a nice long stride and you can land, well, humans aren't meant to land heel first, but pretend you're a horse here, landing nice and heel first on the back part of the foot. And the back part of the foot's where all your soft structures are that are meant to dissipate energy in the back. So think in your normal shoes, break over quick, have a nice long stride, land heel first, away you go. We're putting minimal pressures on all of the other soft tissue structures and bony structures all up and down the limb. If you've got your big long clown shoes on, it's very difficult for you to break over. So quite often you'll shuffle. You'll take a small stride. You'll learn toe first because the toe is so long, it gets there quicker. And you end up with a cascade of inflammation going all up and down the leg. We want short toes on horses, short, short, short. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry.
I get excited.
What sort of problems do you think you'd see in this horse? I know you said it was a rescue, but if it was in work.
I doubt very much that this horse would be able to go barefoot.
Yeah.
He did have boots when he was occasionally worked and ridden, like he was just ridden on trails by a young girl. And because of his, I think we'd never had a diagnosis, but we think that he ended up with navicular syndrome. So there's your pedal bone. Here's your navicular, that's your navicular bone. This one's a bit gross. If anybody's ever seen a navicular bone, it's called a navicular bone because it looks like a little boat, right? If I hold it here, you'll be able to see. So that bone fits at the back here. And we have one more bone here, and I don't have enough arms to do it all. This joint here is called your dip joint, DIP. That's the simple way. It's called the distal interphalangeal joint. That's dip. That's the bottom joint in the limb, right? And we don't have a lot of movement in that, but the deep digital flexor tendon. And now I've got a podcast episode that goes over all of this anatomy, right? But we'll talk about that at the end. So if you're cool and if you're into anatomy, have a listen to that one. But you've got the deep digital flexor tendon runs down the back of the limb. Here's your pastern bone. I'm gonna have to bring it back a bit. Runs down the back of the limb, goes over the top of that navicular bone and attaches to the bottom of P3, the pedal bone here. And when we have long toes, so if I get this out, your pedal bone should have, this much elevation roughly in the back of the foot. And then think about the hoof capsule around it. We want a nice tight hoof capsule around here because it's easier to break over and there's less pull on that navicular bone and the deep digital flexor tendon that runs down the back of the foot. The longer our toe, the harder it is to break over. So if we've got a really long toe, think how hard that is for the horse to break over rather than a nice tight toe. And you're going to be putting more strain on the deep digital flexor tendon and causing inflammation and not necessarily bony changes in your navicular bone. I think this horse's problem was navicular. So to be ridden, I think this horse would need a hoof protection prosthetic mechanical device on him, a shoe of some sort. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But I was really concerned about this horse's navicular bone and navicular issues, but they didn't have the money to have diagnostics done. So he was just retired and kept in the paddock, and we kept him as sound as we possibly could. He's moved out of my area now, so I haven't trimmed him for a while, but I hear he's going okay, being retired. So
thank you.
No worries. I'm going to have to get booking, I think.
Yeah.
All right, so that was my trim schedule. let's move on to hoof infections. So our basic hoof infections, we've got thrush is the big one. Then we've got white line disease. You might have always also heard it called seedy toe. We've got abscessing. And then there's something really cool that I added in. It's not really a big issue, but it's something cool you might have seen before and we don't see it often. So I thought I'd add it in. It's called hoof wall fungus. Thrush. So most hoof infections are caused by anaerobic microbes. So anaerobic means that they hate oxygen. They don't like oxygen. And these guys also like warm environments. So think deep crevices in your horse's foot, and so around around the frog, in the middle of the frog, you've got your central sulcus. Around the edges of the frog is your collateral grooves. Quite often we see bad thrush infections there. So this poor horse on the left, you can see this horse was retired and I took her shoes off and she's got incredibly deep thrush infection in the central sulcus in the middle of the foot there. And Kelvin Grove, there's a Facebook page called Kelvin Grove Equine. They have an excellent series of dissection pictures that show how badly central sulcus thrush can invade live tissue. It's a bit icky to show, I'd like to surprise people in this format. I didn't want to put too many icky photos in here, even though I love that stuff. So I can give you guys the link to that. But basically, the thrush infection in central sulcus can go in and invade live tissue right up in the back of the foot, and it makes them very sore. They'll stop landing. You know how I was talking before about landing heel first, because that's where all the soft structures are. That's where everything is aimed at dissipating ground contact energy instead of transferring it straight into bone. It gets dissipated through soft tissue. So if the back of the foot is sore, they're not going to land on it. They're not even going to weight it properly when they're standing still. So you can even get a misdiagnosis of navicular syndrome. When the horse doesn't have navicular syndrome at all, it could eventually lead to proper navicular syndrome because they're landing toe first. And it's such an easy way to clean that up. So horses will suffer from thrush if in wet environments, but not necessarily just rain. It's more when the rain sticks in the ground and you've got mud, and especially if they're standing around in manure or having urine on their feet. Horses are not meant to stand in their litter box in stables, but that's another talk for another day. The horse on the right there, he had actually had a thrush infection underneath the frog, and half the frog peeled up, and you can see all the black. So thrush is this black, when you pick your horse's foot out and there's black gunk and it smells to high heaven, horses' feet are not meant to stink. Mm-hmm. That means you have an active thrush infection and it needs to be cleared up. So what I generally tell my clients to do is, if it's a deep central sulcus thrush issue there, we need to pack it with an antimicrobial material. I prefer to use a product called Hoof Stuff by Red Horse Products, or Artemud. I don't know, some people might have heard of that. That's just antimicrobial clay. Or a simple, easy way of doing it is getting some cotton wool, little bit of cotton wool, tease it out, put some iodine in it, and gently insert it into there with your hoof pick. Your horse will tell you if it hurts. They will jump and try and pull their leg away. So just insert it gently. And then what you'll find is just reapply that every 2 or 3 days. And what you'll see is the deep crevice will start to open up and open and open, and then you won't even be able to insert anything in there anymore. It should be a thumb depression at the back of the frog there in that central sulcus. It shouldn't be a slit that you can hold a hoof pick in. So that's thrush. That's something easy. You can also, dealing with thrush, I just suggest putting iodine on the foot, but you've got to wire brush the foot out really well first, because iodine doesn't work very well with lots of organic material. It's got to be fairly clean before the iodine can act on the microbes. People have used apple cider vinegar in the past. I find in Sydney we get a lot of thrush issues, which is where I'm based in Sydney. And so apple cider vinegar doesn't do the job. Like I said before, antimicrobial hoof clay products, that sort of thing can really help clear that up. You can even soak the foot, but I find if the thrush is an issue from a wet environment, soaking the foot, it's more wet. So we're wanting to dry it up a bit. So I just tend to use iodine or antimicrobial hoof clay. An extension of thrush. Now, excuse a little bit of an icky picture on the right, but I figured it wasn't too bad. White line disease or seedy toe. Again, it's caused by anaerobic microbes. So we see it in the toe a lot because of long toes, causing mechanical stretching of that lamina line, which is the lamina is the leaves that hold the pedal bone onto the inside of the hoof capsule. It's a really tight connection normally, and it's incredibly strong. It's very difficult to pull a hoof capsule off a horse's leg. Very, very difficult. But if there's lots of mechanical pressure on that toe, it can start to, the leaves will literally just start to, become like a weak connection. So, and that's most of the pressure is at the toe. So that's why we see a lot of white line disease at the toe. Basically, it's anaerobic microbes that take advantage of that like weakened material and go up inside the hoof wall. And you can see on the right-hand side picture here, this is a slice of so someone's come along and cut that pedal bone in half, and then they've cracked open the foot like that, right? Oh, yeah. So we're looking at the inside. So you can see here the black gunky material is really pushing up. This is an excellent photo that I took a photo of way back when I was at college, because you can see that there's like a little notch coming very close to the bone you can see it on both the top and the bottom, where the white around the bone is like a little notch going in. That's actually pushing on the corium, the live tissue, the blood vessels and all that jazz. And you can end up with, I've only got one of my pedal bones here. Anyway, you can end up with notches in the bone and degradation of the bone changes, which again will end up with lameness issues down the street. The pictures on the left, it's the same horse. The top photo is when I was just trimming away and I found a little seedy toe spot. It looks so tiny, right? It doesn't look like it's going to cause much, but then it goes up and up and up and up, and I need to resect that out. Some people will say that you can grow it out with good nutrition and healthy foot and da-da-da. I don't know. In my area, we get a lot of seedy toe. I probably do at least 2 resections a week, and I'm only, well, traditionally I've been a part-time farrier. I'm full-time now. But you've got to keep cutting away. Owners don't do this, farriers and trimmers do this, but it's got to keep being cut away until you get clean margins and all the black is gone, because the black gunk is where the microbes have been, not where they're currently at. You've got to keep going till it's all gone. And then, so the bottom there is he's got a little bit of dirt, which is that little black spot, but that's a completed resection there. And then I get the owner to apply betadine probably 2 or 3 times a week. We can, if it's a deep resection, I might pack it with antimicrobial hoof clay or whatever. But that's another thing that can really, it can cause abscessing, it can cause changes on the bone, it can cause so many problems long term and it's such an easy thing to just cut out and be done with. So that's white line disease. And then here we have abscessing. So abscessing, various causes, internal bruising from incorrect balance or incorrect trimming or shoeing. White line disease that we're just talking about can cause abscessing, because basically abscessing will occur when there's necrotic tissue or foreign material inside in this. We'll go back a little bit. So the pink areas around the bone here, that's all live tissue where we can have immune cells being delivered. And look how close, look how tiny that space is between the tip of where all that dirt is and the inside space. It's very, very close. So having any foreign material in there, and also sequestrum, which is basically, it's generally bone infection or a little bony chip, or it could be anything really. It doesn't have to be bone, but just a foreign body inside. So what happens, it can be either unnoticeable or extremely painful. Quite often I'll be trimming a horse and we'll see I'll see evidence of an abscess, and you end up, and I'll say, oh, the horse has had an abscess, was he sore? And they'll go, oh no, we didn't notice anything. Alternatively, I can come out and the horse is not putting its foot on the floor and acting like there's a broken bone, and because the way it feels is if you imagine hitting your thumb with a hammer and that throbbing, because there's inflammation around the infection site, you know, we get inflammation is just, you know, more liquid, more fluid being put into the area around the tissues. But in a hoof capsule, like if you hit your thumb, it hurts, yeah, but it swells and it can get bigger because the skin can get bigger. A hoof capsule doesn't allow that, so that it's a huge amount of pressure in one area, and it puts it can make horses extremely painful. And abscessing can go underneath the sole, it can pop out the top, it can pop out the back, it can go around the sole and completely, like this horse on the left here, that right hand side of the picture, he had a subsolar abscess, and when I came out to trim him, like the whole entire sole just peeled off. And I mean, he was fine in the end, and I still trim him today. That was 8 years ago or something, and he's fine now, but it was very painful at the time. The horse on the right, the photo on the very right, that's a tiny little abscess coming out in the bar crack there. And we'll find little bits and pieces in horses' feet. And I'm actually pretty sure that was my own horse, and she was never sore. So, but then other horses will show a little abscess there, and they're incredibly painful. They can pop out the frog, whatnot. This horse in the middle was a severe abscess case that happened again. And I think I've got another photo a little bit later on of earlier on, but you can see he's got a big long seedy toe track or white line disease track that stops at an abscess line. Then he has another abscess line, and he's just blown a tiny another little abscess line. And that horse was quite painful as well. And we had to do like oxygen soaks and continue to go on and on and on. It took a long time, but he did grow all that out, and he came good again. So that can be a big problem with your horse's soundness, because it's not just when the abscess is gone, it's growing out the damage that the abscess has done can be a big problem as well. If you have a horse that's having repeated abscessing over and over and over again, you need to have your vet brought in to investigate what's going on. We might need to have radiographs taken, so x-rays, to find out if there is possibly something more sinister going on than just the horse's feet are wet and there's a little infection and da-da-da-da-da.
We have a question here from Melanie.
Yep.
Her horse is on a 5-week cycle.
Yep.
He's never had any hoof problems in the past, but the last couple of trims she's noticed that his white hoof is chipping quite a lot. What might be causing this, and would shortening his trim cycle help? Right.
So depending on where you're at, right, definitely shortening the trim cycle will almost always help that, helping chipping. If your horse is chipping right before and you're already on a shortish schedule, just shorten it by a week or even a few days. Or if you're confident enough, quite often I'll leave a rasp or a rasp. I always get, people tease me about the way I say rasp, but anyway, I am Australian. I don't know why they all tease me. I will leave a rasp with my client, show them how to do a little bit of a bevel, like rounding off the edge, and they can do that at 2 or 3 weeks. And then when I'm out at 4 or 5 weeks, it's you know, we're not putting too much pressure on that. What the problem is with chipping is there's too much pressure on the outside hoof wall. You've got your outer hoof wall, you've got your inner hoof wall, and then you have your laminar line and your sole. So there's varying theories about this, but I've found the best results I've found is where I will bevel off the outside wall completely and have no weight bearing there on trims, and have them weight bearing on the inner hoof wall. So when there's too much chipping, I find it's because the outer hoof wall is weight bearing, and it's just basically the horse is chipping it off. Most of the time it's cosmetic, but recently, depending where you're at. So in Sydney, we had a really bad drought for a long time recently, and then we had really bad floods where horses were standing around in knee-deep water for days on end. And I kept seeing this horrible chipping, outer hoof wall peeling back. I'd never seen chipping on so many horses that was that bad. And I'm like, what is going on with these horses? Is it me? Is it something I'm doing? I seem to be the common denominator here, and I've got a helper. Her name's Emma, one of my colleagues. She comes and helps me 2 days a week, and she's like, you're not the only common denominator here. There's weather as well. So speaking with a few different farrier and trimmer friends, we found that it's happening all over, and it seems to be, and I don't want to get too sciencey here, but you've got your tubules in your hoof wall lines. If you look up really close on the hoof wall, you'll see little lines on the outside. And then you've got in between those tubes, they're held together by what's called intertubular horn, basically glue. right? And what we think's happened is either, you know, just the incredible dry, nutrition related, whatever. All these horses have had a breakdown of the intertubular horn just on the outside of the foot. It's not all the way through, which is why we don't think it's really nutritional. It must be environmental. And then that is peeling back and it looks awful. And these horses that I've had going awesome barefoot for 7 years, on a 4-week cycle for so long, they're all of I'm coming out and I'm like, what is going on with these feet? They look terrible. So that could possibly be an issue as well.
Said she's on the Central Coast.
There you go. That's probably what's happened. It's the big dry and then the big wet. I've noticed that it's just now, like over the last month is when and it's weird because it's not wet anymore. It's drying up again, but I think it's because that really badly affected hoof has grown down and it's weight bearing and this chipping is concentrating at the toe, and it's worse on back feet than it is on front feet because back feet, they use their toe more for pushing. So there's more pressure on the toe and it's pulling it off. Is that all?
Yeah, she said thank you.
No worries. Thank you. You're not alone. We're all suffering with these horrible looking feet right now. Then there's this wall fungus. So here's another slightly icky photo, a little bit of blood. I'm sorry, but it's not too bad. So if you've ever seen, and you might think, is this an abscess hole? But it looks weird because it's a V shape, like a raggedy V shape on your horse's outer hoof wall growing out. And you might not even notice it until it's halfway down. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, there's a big V in my horse's hoof wall. I didn't notice it when it started at the top. What we found is that there's actually something called a wall fungus. And you can see the picture on the left. You can, if you've got maybe I didn't make it really big enough, but you can see that it's a fungus that gets in underneath the hoof wall and goes, it's only locally invasive. It's not like a seedy toe where it goes everywhere and hurts everything. And it goes right through the hoof wall, almost to the inner hoof wall, which is the bright white wall you see there, not the black or grey pigmented wall. And it just kind of grows out, and generally it's cosmetic. It looks ugly, but it grows out fine most of the time. However, you can see this horse, the first time I was ever exposed to it a number of years ago was this horse on the right here. She was another rescue case, first trim ever, and she had these, it was both back feet, not on the front foot, and they weren't at the same level. And I was like, what is this? And it was so bad that as it grew out, we had to really manage, we had to keep her on a short schedule and really manage that crack growing out, because it could have, like I was very concerned about catastrophic hoof wall failure because it was so severe and had gone, and the crack was so deep. So that's something that just as it gets down to weight bearing level, you might want your farrier to maybe shorten up the trim cycle really short for come back in 2 or 3 weeks so that you can trim that out nicely, and then you can just move on with your horse and have that strong outer hoof wall structure there. Movement. So here we have 2 silly mares back when they were young and dumb. These are my horses. And we talk about movement. We all kind of understand, I think, that keeping horses locked up in very small areas is not ideal because they end up having, stereotypies. They windsuck, they crib bite, they'll box walk or fence walk, We know that horses yearn for a little bit of movement. So wild horses, depending on the environment, they will have like more or less movement. So Brian Hampson, he does the Brumby studies in Australia, and he did a study with Chris Pollitt, who's a hoof researcher, and they looked at Brumbies and how much movement they did. They also looked at domestic horses as well, and they found that some of these horses had so the barefoot movement is really built on the wild hoof model, and there's like horses' hooves are really over-engineered. They put up with a lot of stress before there's catastrophic failure. And these Brumbies, we were trying to figure out what's the ideal amount of movement for horses. And some of these Brumbies were traveling, 50, 60 more kilometers a day. And they were showing signs. They looked like they had beautiful, short, tiny little healthy feet. But when they were unfortunately dissected and looked at, there was evidence of pathology, so laminitis, inflammation. So we're like, okay, well, that's not really ideal, is it? That's too much movement. Hampson then looked at horses in a small yard, and they only moved around about 1.1 kilometres a day, so it's 0.6 miles. and that's really not enough stimulation. Every time a horse moves correctly, nice heel first, but not too heel first, nice and heel first, that stimulates the back of the foot to be healthy, right? To lay down fibro cartilage rather than fatty tissue in the back. They're born with fatty tissue in the back of the foot. And as long as they get enough movement and stimulation, that will turn into a really healthy cartilage. And then to maintain that throughout a horse's life, because the foot is plastic, you do need to maintain this heel first movement. So in horses in a paddock of, 16 hectares, which is, nearly 40 acres? That's a pretty big paddock. And I don't know any of my clients that keep their horses in a 40-acre paddock. They were moving around 7.2 kilometres a day. And you can see here the evidence-based ideals around 11 to 15 kilometres a day, according to, wild horses living in their ideal environment with no pathology shown in their feet. So that's around 7 to 9 miles a day. So it can be very difficult to provide your horse with enough movement in our domestic situation. So things you can do to increase movement. So there's something called a paddock paradise, or a loop paddock system, where you have your outside fence line, and then you just build another fence line inside of that. So there's a lane all the way around the edge of your paddock, and you keep the horses in the lane. You spread out your resources. So your water's in one corner of the paddock, your food's over there, their loafing areas over there. So it's not just all in one area, so they don't have to move much. Turning them out with other horses, as you can see in my picture, they, jazz each other up. They move around more because they have friends with them, and over varied terrain as well. So a lot of these paddock paradise systems, and you can implement all this with just normal paddocks as well. You don't have to build extra paddocks. Just have a think about, well, if I dump my horse's hay here and put his feed bucket here, and there's his water there, and there's his shelter right there, why is he ever going to go up the back and move, in between? So get your steps up, we all have these Fitbits these days. Walk your horse's feed bucket all the way up the back, tie his hay over there, that kind of thing. And varied terrain. So a lot of these clients will put areas where they've got poles that horses need to walk over, or rocks, or, gravel, or whatever. All of this different stimulation for the foot helps with the wear, helps with stimulation, can really improve your horse's feet. Now, diet is really important for feet, and it's too big of a subject for me to talk about here. And also, I'm not an equine nutritionist. I know a lot about diet because of, uni and how it affects the foot and whatnot, but I just wanted to cover up a few little basics. So sugar, I think all horses should be on a low carbohydrate diet, and only as a base diet, and only be fed carbohydrates, so grains basically, when they're going to be using that in work, right? And fed at an appropriate level. And some horses that have got, and I'll go into a little bit when we get to the metabolic profile stuff, that have got, I guess you could say they're carbohydrate intolerant. So the part that you want to look at on a feed label is, you want to see, and not all of them will put it there, you want to look at the ESC stands for ethanol soluble carbohydrate. It's just basically ethanol soluble carbohydrate, and the starch are the bits that will give you a sugar spike, which in turn goes with an insulin spike, which can cause inflammation in the body. And any inflammation in the body is going to be inflammation in the feet, as we saw before with the abscessing. Inflammation in the feet, there's not enough room for inflammation in the feet, that will end up causing issues. So so you want that to be generally less than 10% in sensitive horses, and I think all horses should be under 15%. And if you're unsure about your hay, how much sugar's in the hay, you can soak your hay, and for a minimum of 2 hours, just put it in a hay net, soak it, pull it out, rinse it off, have a look at the water will look like tea, and then you can give your horse your hay if they're sensitive. Like a lot of horses that tend to go around barefoot and just a bit ouchy, they get so much better when you reduce the sugar in their diet. Ideally, you want to test your forage, your hay and your grass, and send that off to look at the profile that comes back, because you want to balance your minerals that you give your horse around the forage testing. But I know that can be very difficult in a lot of areas. It's difficult for me in particular because, our hay comes from all over. It's never the same sauce at the feed store as what, you know, you had 2 weeks ago. And so it can be very difficult to do that, but that is the ideal. And I insist on it in some of my clients that have got very sensitive horses. Now, your mineral balancing, this isn't the format for it, but I find that you need to have, in my area, you need to have enough magnesium, copper and zinc, and in the right ratio. So that's something that if you're not quite sure about, you need to go and you need to employ an equine nutritionist, a proper equine nutritionist, to do a diet analysis for you. It is well worth it for your horse's hoof health. If that's what's holding your horse back, is hoof pain. They should always have something to eat. We can't be keeping our horses in paddock with bare, you know, nothing to pick on. So providing them forage 24/7 in a small bowl, a small whole hay net, a really small whole hay net. And there is talk that can affect their teeth, but I've fed small whole hay nets, hay out of small whole hay nets my whole life, and my horse has got great teeth. That's anecdotal, but anyway, that's the way I think. They always need to have something to eat. They, you know, they end up with ulcers. They end up with, again, inflammation. It's stressful for them, which increases inflammation, and then if you're really having problems, you really should have your horse tested for metabolic issues. So insulin resistance is one that's really common, and more common than I think we realise. And PPID, which is colloquially known as Cushing's disease. These are things that the management of these diseases, they end up having laminitic episodes, laminitis, and if you know what your horse has got, you can treat it appropriately. So this is a picture of a horse that had previously no mineral balancing, and then we looked at our minerals a little bit and we increased the copper and zinc in the right values, and we gave him at least double the recommended amount of copper and zinc, and we also added magnesium. And look at the difference in that hoof ball structure. Before, he could not hold a shoe, and his feet were cracking terribly at the end of a 3-week cycle, and it was just a nightmare. So we looked at the diet, we changed it, and look how much closer. Like, there's no more tiny little cracks. There's a couple of big cracks that will take a little while to grow out, or they may be permanent. But you know, on a short trim cycle, they're only cosmetic. And then right at the top, don't worry about that crusty look at the top. That's just the very, very outer hoof wall called the periople, which is like the same as our what's at the bottom of the nail. You know what I'm called? The quick, not the quick, the bit that you push back. I can't remember the word. But that's what happens when you have mineral balancing.
So I just wanted to confirm with that picture,
Yes.
is that you're talking about how the cracks have grown out and you now have a much healthier hoof
Yes.
at the top there. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. 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 And it's just amazing. I should have taken a photo at the last trim when that crappy foot, not that it's really swearing, but that crappy hoof grows out, how it'll be chipped and horrible, and then the next trim, the feet just beautiful. If your horse's feet look like the bottom part of this horse's foot, it's almost always nutritional, and you need to look deeper into the diet and employ an equine nutritionist to really look deeply in your diet, because if that's holding your horse back, you'll be amazed how different, like a horse that previously has to have shoes on can go barefoot, and quite happily so if we're really on top of the diet. Okay, so I'm not a traditional metal shod farrier. I started off as a barefoot person, as I was talking about in my intro, and I really love polyurethane shoes as an alternative to metal hoof protection. So the 3 things that I use the most are hoof boots. They're a temporary protection for riding, or when your horse has got really sore feet, you can use a therapy boot. You can put pads in them, and you take them off when the horse doesn't need it. Quite often, you know, we walk around barefoot on carpet all the time, but if we go outside on our gravel driveway, we want to put thongs on, or shoes, or thongs as in the shoe, on our feet, you know. So I find a lot of these barefoot horses, you want to take them on a trail, you want to take them, you know, on the Mountain Lagoon endurance ride, just get some hoof boots, and we'll go into the hoof boots in a minute. Hoof casts. So casts are exactly what you would put around, not exactly, but very, very similar to what you would wrap around plaster if you break your arm. I use a lot of casts. You can use them under shoes to nail in. If you've got crappy hoof wall, you can put them straight on the foot just to protect the foot if it's, you know, for whatever reason the sole's too thin or the walls are crappy or whatever. You can put them over polyurethane glued on shoes that don't have any tabs, and I'll have a quick look at that in a minute. I love casts. I always have like 4 or 5 casts in the truck at any one time, and I use them quite a lot. And they're also easy for, well, easy-ish. If an owner can pick out a foot and the horse is quiet, an owner can apply a hoof cast if someone shows you how. And then polyurethane shoes, I love them. They can be flexible or, you know, less flexible, but they're more flexible than a metal shoe in general. They reduce concussion, and they are a permanent protection option. You put them on and the owner doesn't have to muck around between farrier or trimmer appointments. You can glue or nail them. Now, these are the considerations for hoof boots. So have a think about what kind of boot you want. So the 2 top left boots, they're riding boots. And then the Easy Boot Cloud on the right here is a therapy boot that is worn in a paddock 24/7, taken off once a day, cleaned, dried, put back on. I'll put a lot of laminitic horses in a therapy boot, especially initially before we apply any other kind of shoe or boot or anything like that. You have to think about the retainment system. So how's the boot held on the foot? High profile versus low profile boots. So I'm going to show you some boots in a second to tell you what the difference is there. You can put pads in them. So soft pads, firm pads, frog pads, no frog pads, wedge pads. You can put a bunch of different type of things in boots. I prefer to use close fitting boots rather than forgiving fit boots because I keep all my horses on a nice short schedule. But some of my older clients who maybe have arthritis in the hands and can't, you know, don't have enough strength, a close fitting boot is a little bit harder to put on. So I can sometimes use a forgiving fit boot, but then, you know, those riders, I'm not suggesting they go galloping up a hill because they may toss a boot if it's not as close fitting. And then the other consideration is it competition legal? Most competitions like dressage, eventing, like Olympic disciplines, they're generally not competition legal. I think Victoria has just allowed scoot boots in their adult riding club competitions, but don't quote me on that. But generally they're not. So hoof boots might not be the protection for you if you're a competition rider. I know we're getting short on time. I'm trying to skip through. So the top left is a high profile boot in relation to, so it's a Cavallo boot, and the boot in the middle at the top is a scoot boot. That's a low profile boot. Can you see how it's below the coronary band? That means it's a low profile boot. It's closer fitting. It's a tighter fit. You generally have better retention with those kind of boots. Whereas the high profile boots tend to be more forgiving in fit. You can use more pads and things in them, but then you might have retention issues. Again, we've got just the top right boot. That's a Renegade. I think it might be the Viper. I don't really sell a lot of those. I think I've only sold 2 in my life. They're rather expensive, but they're a really good boot as well. Bottom left is a Easy Care. What are they called? Edge. Is it Edge? You can use this as a therapy boot or a riding boot. So that's a good versatile boot to have. Bottom middle is a glove boot. You can heat fit these for a really close fit. They're pretty cool. And then we've got the Cloud boot as well. My favorite thing in the whole wide world, polyurethane shoeing, gluing it on. I use it for stability, providing stability for a hoof. I use it to build mechanics. So, you know, if we need to manage our balance, but I can't, if he's got a foot like this, but I can't trim down this side anymore, what are we going to do? We can add some glue on the other side and straighten him up. And for comfort, using this pink stuff is called dental impression material. It's like trotting around on a cloud. These horses just, they love it. You can also, again, nail on polyurethane shoes. So all these shoes at the top are all different kinds of nail-ons. You've got a costume shoe on the left, which is an open heel shoe. I'll only use these on horses with good frogs because there's no stimulation there for the frog. You can't really see the bottom of the 2 middle shoes. They're sideways views, but you can see the second left top photo. The shoe is actually bending. It's moving around uneven surfaces, whereas a metal shoe won't do that. So I find that can be either, depending on the situation, that can be a good thing or a bad thing, but I tend to find most situations it's a good thing. The bottom ones are all glue-ons, all different views of glue-ons. You can see the foot in the middle at the bottom there. He's got a big wide flat foot, but he needs leverage reduction. So the bottom of the shoe is smaller than the edge of the hoof walls, but he's still got support with the glue there. So that horse went awesome in those shoes. And the bottom right one is a horse with a really bad clubfoot. And you can see I've got more glue height in the toe than what I have in the heel of this foot, to kind of, because she's got a very upright foot. So I, you know, brought up that toe a little bit to try and give her a little bit of relief, but then also reducing that leverage so she can have an easy breakover. Because a very high foot, yeah, they're going to land heel first, but their bone is like this. So it's going to land, even though the heel is landing first, it's actually, it's a biomechanically a toe first landing. So that's what I did with her. And then the bottom left photo, that's just my mare with a shoe on her back foot. And then you can see a little bit of the dental impression material poking out the back, and it's lost its color. Like, that's what it looks like at about, I think she was about 3 weeks there. And the glue is still solidly on. And yeah, she really loved that setup. That she had hot problems before that, and she's been barefoot since I pulled those shoes off, and she's going awesome now. I don't know if we have much time for questions, but I've got five minutes now, I guess. Has anybody got any questions about all that?
While we're waiting for some questions to come through, yep. I was having a little stalk over on your Facebook page.
Okay, great.
Glorious Hoof.
Yep.
And I saw some pretty remarkable results with posture.
Yes.
With posture trimming. So how much do you find is conformational issues, and how much do you find is lazy farriers?
Look, okay, so I don't think, okay, we'll start off by saying that being a farrier or a trimmer is extremely hard work.
Yes.
Horses pull on us, they kick out, we sweat into our own eyeballs, we're out in all weather. It's a really hard job. Yeah. And I don't know, like, why anyone would get involved in being, unless they had the passion for it. And I know that there are people out there that people might think are poor farriers or whatever, but everyone is doing the best job that they know with the knowledge that they have. So if you're finding that you're having issues with posture, balance, poor hoof care, blah, 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 and you've done all of these things, shortening, you know, all the things we've talked about today, and you're still having hoof issues, have a chat with your farrier. And if they're not open to change, because some of us can be a bit like, oh, what the owner's telling us what to do. Like some people get a bit uppity about that. It might be time to find someone who aligns a bit more with you. It's the same as a trainer. If you're going to a trainer and you're not happy doing the things that they're asking you to do, you just don't align with that person. It's fine. It's not a problem. Someone else will fill that gap. You can move on with someone else. It's the same with farriery. So I concentrate on certain things. But I will like stuff that we've chatted about today, and I love laminitis and navicular rehab and a bit of performance horse stuff. But there's some things that I might not necessarily have enough background in or enough knowledge on. For example, building a metal shoe for a horse that really needs extreme stability, say if they have a broken pedal bone. So I would refer that out, right? So
we actually just had that question come through.
Okay, so what was the question?
So one of our members, Sally, her mare is recovering from a fractured pedal bone, and the last X-ray was that the fracture was still there.
Right.
She has her in a bar shoe with clips metal.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
I think that's appropriate. You need to cast that bone. It needs to have very minimal movement to be able to like look at this bone. It's tiny, right? And that's from a big horse. Like, and especially if it's a front foot, having to have so much pressure on that. Like, we know that they carry around about 60% of their body weight on the front feet. So if you think how much that tiny little weight that bone is taking at the end of that, having a metal shoe to really keep that bone still is very appropriate in that situation. And there's other situations where a metal shoe is appropriate, in my opinion. And I'm not saying if you metal shoe your horse, it's the wrong thing. Good hoof care is good hoof care, right? So I would much rather see a beautifully looked after metal shod foot than, and even though I've got a barefoot background, than a barefoot horse that's kept on an 8-week schedule and there's thrush and, you know, leverage issues and da-da-da-da-da. But, you know, there's other situations where I would refer out for a metal shoe, which is, you know, a horse whose high level of eventing needs studs. It's very difficult. You can stud polyurethane shoes, but it can be very difficult. And like some of these shoes, I've got some here, but like, so some of these shoes are quite, you know, I don't know if you're going to be able to, they're quite hard and it's very difficult to bend them. But they're still not going to hold a stud like they should. And some of these shoes are a lot, like these are the same brand, they're just different models. Some of these shoes are way more flexible, right? They widen with the hoof as it grows. They have unilateral heel movement. You can bend the whole thing. So some horses might need more stability, so I'll go to this. And if they need even more stability than this shoe, I'll refer them out to a metal shod farrier. I don't know if I've really answered your question about the posture.
No, that was perfect. Beautiful. Okay. Thank you.
That's okay.
I also saw on your Facebook page using some medical maggots.
Yes. So that was my first foray into medical maggots, and it went awesome. The horses, I trimmed him the other day actually, and it's very, like, it cleaned up really quickly. But when I unwrapped the foot, there were like no live, like when I unwrapped the foot a few days later, there were no, they'd all eaten and finished what they wanted and had left.
And that was for an abscess.
For an abscess, that's right. It was a dirty, gross, necrotic filled abscess. So medical maggots, I was first introduced to the idea by Daisy Bicking, who's a farrier in America that specializes in glue-on and polyurethane shoeing, which is where I get a lot of my passion from, because she's a wonderful lady. And she uses medical maggots a lot for like hoof infections that are so bad that everyone has said, put this horse to sleep, please, for heaven's sake. And she's managed them on her own farm, or she's gotten medical maggots in, and, you know, 2 or 3, maximum 3 repeats of the medical maggots has cleared it up, because they only eat the necrotic tissue. They don't eat live healthy tissue.
Yeah.
It's awesome. And I finally found a supplier in Australia, in Sydney actually, that a client is a friend with. So I have, and generally need them on prescription. So we use those medical maggots on the client's horse, and the client obtained them herself. So we didn't have a vet involved in that situation, but generally you need a vet involved for medical maggots. But it's a really good option for some of these really bad hoof infections that will not go away no matter how much, because it's very difficult for the horse, providing oral or intramuscular or IV antibiotics. There's a lot of debate as to whether it even gets to the foot, and it doesn't. It really doesn't. So giving antibiotics for an abscess is really, if your vet is giving antibiotics for an abscess, ask them why, because it's generally, you need to have, for an infection in the foot, you need something called regional limb perfusion, where they put a tourniquet on the limb, and below the tourniquet they will put IV antibiotics and hold it on there, and it's a hospital stay, and it's extremely expensive, and that's why you do not want an infection in your horse's foot to go crazy. Look after it, nip it in the bud when it's tiny and little.
Beautiful. I don't think that we have any other questions.
Yes.
Just thank yous.
You're welcome, everyone. I hope I haven't overwhelmed anyone.
I think there's definitely going to be another go back and rewatch. Lucky we can get this on replay. Right. And I think I'm going to be really going back into my horse husbandry and refreshing myself on what I'm doing with my ponies.
Yeah. You might not even notice that something that you've just done your entire life and it's never caused a problem before might be a mitigating factor in like, how difficult is it to make a connection with your horse, to ride your horse, to have a happy relationship with them when there's some pain holding them back, whether that's, you know, in the mouth with the bitting like we saw earlier with Anna, or, you know, in the feet or throughout the body. Ticking off all of those things and having all these things going well for you, and knowing that pain isn't an issue just opens. And how many behavioral issues do you see come from pain?
Oh, most of them.
Yep. And you might think, well, the horse is sound. It might not necessarily
doesn't mean that they are happy.
Yeah, or not in pain.
Yeah.
Anyway, these are my socials, guys. So I post a lot, as Katie was saying. I post a lot of cool things. So
check out the Facebook page. It was pretty awesome to have a scroll through.
It's fun. It's fun stuff. I love it. I live, breathe, sleep, eat. I don't eat hooves, but, you know, like, everything I do is just about feet, and I just love that stuff. And I just had to have a bit of a giggle.
I do have a question.
Yeah, okay.
From Lisa. So Lisa, just when you can pop it in, and I'll let you finish, Lisa.
Yep, that's all right. So just quickly, this is a photo of me on my mare at the end of our very first event, the cross country phase, and it was, for once, they'd done the show jumping before the cross country. And I was so incredibly happy. And it was at the end of it was midway through, but it was my horses cost me a lot with medical dramas. And this was after spending about $30,000 on medical issues on this horse over the previous 4 years. And she was finally sound and happy and what a dag, but look how happy I was on my face because we got on top of everything.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, we got on top of everything. That was a really wonderful memory. So when I was going through making this PowerPoint, I was like, I'll chuck that photo in there. That's cute.
Yeah.
We both look like we're smiling.
I'm not sure who has the question. I think it might be Sarah because it says from Equestrian Movement.
Okay.
So, Sarah, do you have a question?
Yeah, my question is, can Lisa pretty please come to Queensland?
Maybe. You know what? You'll have to ask my husband because he's the one who has to stay home with my 5-year-old or 5-year-old, or I can convince them to come on a working holiday.
Yes.
Right?
Sounds good to me.
Sounds like fun. All right.
Yeah, so definitely go over and check out the Facebook page because there's some pretty cool pictures on there and whatnot. And I'm definitely subscribing to your podcast.
Yes, please do.
I have already learned so much today, let alone what I can imagine you're going to be sharing on a regular basis. So.
Yeah, I basically just turn my microphone on and I try and keep it succinct, but they're generally around 45-minute, 1-hour episodes. But they're perfect for when you're driving, like driving the kids to school or, when you're driving around in the car. And the whole point of my podcast is to hopefully help, because I just want to help horses, right? I don't care. That's the reason why I was put on this planet, is to help horses. And I started the podcast at the beginning of this year because I felt like I had, well, number one, not enough people to talk about feet with that actually wanted to sit and listen to me for hours on end. So I'm like, there's people out there that will want to hear this stuff. And number two, even if one 3-minute clip out of one episode makes an owner go, hang on a second, that makes me think of my horse and maybe I can do this, that, or the other. And then the horse ends up, positively benefiting from that. And I never hear about it. I don't care. I just feel I just want to help. So have a listen to my podcast. I do stuff on, I've done an anatomy post. I've done stuff on body work, diet. Oh, no, I haven't done my diet episode yet. Insulin resistance. There's a bunch of it. I think I'm up to 7 or 8 episodes now. So go and have a look at that, guys.
Thank you so much for sharing your time and your knowledge with us today.
That's okay.
I really enjoyed it. So
I've really had fun too. Thank you so much for organising this. I was just, as soon as you guys said, hey, we're going to do this, I was like, sign me up.
That's awesome.
It's really fun.
Thanks for jumping on board.
No worries.
So if you came in at the end there, or if you've missed part of it, or if you're on the replay, #replay, add any extra questions that you have, and we will get back to you with answers. Otherwise, we are going again at 5 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, I think. I know Sarah set me up with all of this leading into it, and now my brain isn't.
We'll be live in 3 hours.
Live in 3 hours. There we go. Thanks, Sarah. I will see you guys then. Bye.